Hello, everybody. My name is John Billingsley, and I played Dr. Philip Phlox in Star Trek Enterprise. And congratulations! You're listening to Trek Untold.
And welcome back to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. And welcome to the very first Trek Untold of 2023. Last year was a great one and saw some amazing guests stop by, and the next 12 months will be no different. I hinted at it in an older episode, but there's a lot of folks coming up this year whose Trek stories have never been told in depth, and others whose stories have never been told at all. As far as this podcast itself, Trek Untold has also gone through some changes in the last year, including new theme music, how I run the show, and also moving over to a new YouTube channel. And speaking of, if you aren't already, do make sure you subscribe now over at youtube.com/@TrekUntold, and that's the @ symbol like you'd use on Twitter. So youtube.com/@TrekUntold so that you don't miss a thing. And even if you're not watching these interviews on YouTube and you're just listening to the audio ones, there's going to be some exclusive video content there that you're going to want to tune into and not miss out on. So make sure you head over there and hit that subscribe button. I have high hopes for 2023 and some big personal goals, like building out that aforementioned YouTube channel, growing my social media pages, and becoming better interacting on them, which is something I can definitely improve on, and also getting my Patreon up to snuff. I'm always thankful for the supporters I have, and I would welcome some new faces there too, which, by the way, you can join that on patreon.com/TrekUntold for free to get some special things there. And if you want to become a paid Patreon supporter to get some other exclusive benefits, well, you'll learn about that later, but you can do that too. And yes, I am shilling a little bit early in the show, but that's because there is a lot going on and a lot of ways you can be part of this community. And really, that's what I want to accomplish this year with this show. I want to build the Trek Untold community. Maybe we'll call that the Trexcavators. I don't know. We'll see how that works out here. But ultimately, the goal is to interact with everyone more, to give you something very unique from this podcast that you can't get anywhere else. But that's enough about my plans and goals for this year. I don't want to keep you waiting any longer because 2023 is beginning with a big guest. On this episode, the Doctor is in the house because John Billingsley is stopping by to chat. You most likely remember John as Dr. Phlox from all 4 seasons of Star Trek Enterprise. He is a character actor extraordinaire, and his list of credits beyond Trek is long and prolific. John is hilarious, highly intelligent, self-deprecating, and a wonderful human being. And coming up later this month, he's going to be part of the Trek Talks telethon event to raise money for the Hollywood Food Coalition. We're going to spend some time discussing that, as well as plenty of Trek talk, and also answering some of your questions. If you're not following me on social media or Patreon, this is the stuff you're missing out on, and this is why I'm stressing for you guys to come over and be part of this community. And for this interview, you guys have really surprised me with some of the truly excellent questions, many of which I hadn't even thought of myself. So John and I got through as many of them as we could from what I picked, and that means there is a lot of fun stories and great behind-the-scenes tales from Enterprise and a whole lot more. John is embarrassed by nothing, so yeah, we're going pretty deep here with a lot of really, really fun stuff. So without further ado, let's head over to sickbay and spend some time with the good doctor, Mr. John Billingsley. But before we begin this week's episode, I want to remind you to follow Trek Untold on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Trek Untold, all one word. You can get show updates, check out some fun memes, and let me know what you think about what's going on with the current events in the Star Trek universe. You can also support this show directly on Patreon at patreon.com/TrekUntold, where you can support this show for as little as $2 a month. At higher tiers, you can listen to the shows before they come out, know about my guests well in advance, and even have a chance to ask them questions, get transcripts of these episodes to make sure you get all the info, and more benefits coming soon, including watch parties and live streams. But that's all dependent on more fans like you coming over and letting me know you want to be a part of events like that. If you want some Trek Untold merchandise, check out our store for gear and apparel, including shirts, hats, stickers, water bottles, notebooks, and a whole lot more. New designs will be added throughout the year, so it's always worth taking a peek. Trek Untold also has an Amazon shop where you can peruse everything Star Trek, sci-fi, and geeky on Amazon in one convenient location. If you're looking for a gift for the Trekkie in your life, or maybe want to see some of my favorite non-Star Trek things that you can get for yourself, check out the link for my Amazon shop in the show notes on the audio version and in the description below this video on YouTube. If you're listening to us on iTunes or any other audio platforms that allow for ratings and reviews, please leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review to help out this show. If you're watching it on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to us at youtube.com/TrekUntold and give the video a thumbs up and a comment. All of these things help more people find this show and to continue growing and bringing you awesome guests each and every week. Now, without further ado, let's beam in this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. And welcome back to Trek Untold. And now joining me on the other side of the screen, I am very excited. I'm very ecstatic. I'm clearly very enthusiastic and very eager to introduce today's guest. We are joined today by Dr. Phlox himself, Mr. John Billingsley. John, how are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. And Boo-Cat.
And we have Boo-Cat in the house today, too.
Yes, you do.
It's not quite a Porthos. It's not quite a Beagle, but I think it's personally better.
Take a good look at Boo. Boo, come on. You want to look for the camera? Oh, he's so shy. He's such a retiring type. That's right. I'll make up in brashness what he lacks.
Well, thank you for that, John. I look forward to hearing that.
Absolutely. Catch the chrome dome there. Now you've got me in all my glory.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for being here today. You know, I sent out a big thing on social media to let folks know I was talking to you, and I got a ton of feedback, a ton of questions for you, which we're going to get into as we progress here. But first, I got to ask you my stuff. I got to get my things in.
I'm intrigued.
Oh, we got some real good stuff, John. I'm actually, this is some real high quality questions here we got, and we're going to dive into things beyond Trek also. So there's some good stuff here. Let me hit you up with my first question. I love to ask all my guests, John, and that's, what's your earliest memory of Star Trek? Did you grow up watching it?
I was 6 years old in 1966 when it premiered. I did not have a memory of watching it, although I later on found out that, in fact, I did sneak in to watch it with my brother, who was 7 years older. And so my earliest legitimate memory is when I watched it in reruns in the New York area on, I believe, Channel 11. It was on in the afternoons. I'd come home from school and I'd watch Star Trek. I'm sure I saw all the original episodes by the end of my pre-adolescent years. And then I was wandering about doing this, that, and the other, doing theater primarily for all the years when Next Gen and Deep Space were on, and didn't really grok Voyager. So when I got Enterprise, I confess that I knew very little about the modern Star Trek world. I had to get a crash course in who are the Bajorans and who are the Andorians and who are those people? But I had some willing friends who took me to Star Trek college.
And shout out to WPIX 11. That's my network also for Star Trek.
WPIX.
There we go.
There you go.
And, you know, while we are, of course, here to talk about Star Trek, there is something else more important that we have to talk about that's tied into Star Trek. And that's going to be that John is going to be part of the Trek Talks 2 telethon, which benefits the Hollywood Food Coalition. And John, really, I think this is the most important thing we're going to talk about today. So let's just start off this podcast about that. What can you tell my listeners about the Trek Talks 2 telethon and the Hollywood Food Coalition?
Fabulous. I'll start with the Hollywood Food Coalition, since that's the cause this is designed to support. It's about 40 years old. It started as street corner service for people experiencing homelessness, hot meals, and various emergency provisions. And as it grew and evolved into a more elaborate multi-course dinner that we served indoors, when I got involved about 6 years ago, my sense was, as was the case with my wife, we felt that both expanding the quality of the food that could be provided and ultimately sharing the food that we collected with other organizations might be a lifeline to help grow community awareness of the work we were doing. So a lot of the work has been about trying to bring more good food to more people in Los Angeles. And we currently rescue about 2 million pounds of food a year, which we share with about 130 other organizations to help buttress and augment their meal programs. So we are touching and affecting the lives of thousands of people a day. We continue to serve a hot, nourishing meal. We continue to provide emergency resources. We partner with a lot of other social service providers to help our clients gain access to housing programs, mental health programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we sit at a lot of tables where we work with other community groups who are trying to come up with solutions to the systemic problems, more transportation, more refrigeration, more capacity to share food, the kinds of things he can only do collaboratively. So that's the Hollywood Food Coalition in a nutshell. I was the board president for a number of years. I've been very, very involved for the last 6. Track Talks arose out of a conversation I had with Bill Smith and Dan Davidson, Trek geeks, your allies in podcasting.
Shout out to Trek Geeks. They're the ones who helped connect us for this interview.
Indeed. And John Champion, the wonderful John Champion with Roddenberry Podcasts, also a dear friend I've known for years. They had, Bill and Dan had done an event with Jonathan Frakes to promote Feeding America. And they'd raised a little money, and I was on their show, and we were talking about that. And I said, I wonder if we could get more guests from Star Trek to come and make it kind of a Jerry Lewis-esque telethon. And we tried it last year. And much to our surprise, everybody we asked to attend said yes. So I was like, oh, I guess this is going to be 6 hours long. And so it was. And we raised $80,000 for the Hollywood Food Coalition, in great part because of a very generous contribution from Rod Roddenberry himself. And we thought, well, we got to do this again. So we're doing it again on January 14, Trek Talks 2, which will start at 10 o'clock in the morning Pacific and go till 6 o'clock. We've got some fabulous guests. Brent Spiner's going to be there. I'm actually going to keep some of these guests kind of in reserve because some of them have asked to, not be announced publicly until the first of the year.
Oh, you tease, John. You tease.
We've got a couple that are really going to be like, oh my God. So, but John Delancey's going to be there. Terry Farrell's going to be there. Nana's going to be there. Some wonderful, the Hageman brothers are going to be there. A lot of panels. We'll have some musical interludes. Bonnie Gordon and I are hosting. She is a marvelous, effervescent person who I think is worth the price of admission in her own right. And the price of admission, by the way, is just, if you can, consider this a convention that you don't have to get out of your pajamas to attend. If you could consider making a donation to the Hollywood Food Coalition, if you watch, trektalks.net will take you to the Hollywood Food Coalition. It'll take you to, so you can learn more about us. It'll take you to the various, there are a number of platforms you can watch the show on. Trektalks.net is pretty much your one link that tells the whole darn story.
And for anybody who's coming to this podcast a little bit late, a little bit after the Trek Talks 2 telethon happens, also want to suggest you guys go to the Hollywood Food Coalition's official website at hofoco.org to see how you can continue to support them even when this event is not going on.
Absolutely.
And, John, the thing is, I've spoken to a few other folks in the LA area who do a lot of charity work. And I know, especially during the pandemic, like the homeless and people living below the poverty line have been hit extra hard. And so, what you guys are doing is really, really extra important, especially this time of year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's funny because I think one of the things that I always want to stress is that while we serve our meal to certainly a healthy contingent of people who are experiencing homelessness, it's for all comers. So sometimes people who are coming to the line are simply people who couldn't make their paycheck stretch. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the organizations we work with, for instance, we work with veterans groups. We work with a wonderful organization called the Village Family Services that works with at-risk kids. We work with groups that support women who've experienced abuse and have fled their homes. We really are trying to say that there are any number of groups that are doing really cool and wonderful things for their particular constituencies, and that really raising the quality of the meal service they provide raises their capacity to actually engage their clients and their customers in the work that they're doing. There's one story I always tell, which to me is very significant. Village Family Services, which offered great classes and workshops and symposiums and whatever for the kids to come and kind of maybe dig into building their lives up. Their lunch program kind of consisted of, bologna sandwiches. Maybe sometimes they had a little mini Weber barbecue they throw a hot dog on. We started rescuing food from TV shows and movie shoots years ago, and we started providing them with food that we picked up directly from catering. So we were bringing in for a period of time the food that was served on the prom, which was featuring Meryl Streep. So we were bringing, there's fried chicken and collard greens and mashed potatoes and corn on the cob and peach cobbler and yada, yada, yada. And one, the kids were like, this is great food. And two, it was like, wait, I'm eating Meryl Streep's lunch? And the kids were like, woohoo! And they started coming back, not that they weren't excited by the programming, but the allure of a great lunch is it always starts from that. That's something we believe is the one thing you need to do every day is you need to have a great meal.
Mm.
You need some of our clients, it's the only meal they're going to have all day.
Yeah.
We always want to provide choice. We want to make sure that people who come to our line have the ability to choose between vegan, vegetarian, and meat oriented dishes, multiple salad choices, including a fruit salad, multiple dessert choices. Ultimately, we really want to have. Right now, we're on another campus. We don't own the property. When we have our own facility, which we're building towards, we really want to be able to have a true sit-down meal with a menu and servers, so that people who do not frequently are not treated with the respect they deserve, actually have the opportunity to feel the dignity of being fully, seen.
Yeah, there's such a heavy stigma with not just people outside but not just people outside looking in at these kinds of places, but also the people who have to go to these places. And it's tough. So the fact that you're treating them like actual human beings and giving them an experience that is not just like the typical shelter experience, I think that is what's really most amazing and honorable about what you guys are doing. So, honestly, it was a great opportunity for me to have an excuse to talk to you, but also I'm very, very proud to be able to be part of supporting what you guys are doing here and spreading the word about it, because it truly is some excellent work you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. And if you're willing to spread the word between now and the 14th, that's fabulous. We're putting little announcements out, over the course of the next 3-4 weeks, 3 or 4 guests, dropping them at a time. Anything you can do to spread the word is much appreciated.
Well, we got a whole captive audience here today, so they're listening, and I'm hoping a lot of them are going to go support the event. So if you do want to support Trek Talks 2, there's going to be links in the show notes for this episode, so do make sure you check them out. Now, John, I want to spend some time taking a deep dive today into Phlox, and I've been doing my homework, been going back and watching some good old Enterprise episodes again, and reminding myself what a good show that was, by the way. I really
bet you're going to surprise me with the information you know about Denobulan and Phlox that I have long forgotten. I actually refreshed my own memory by going and reading some of the literature that exists about Denobulan. It's like, I didn't know that. We were? Oh my!
Well, you'll be surprised with some of the questions, because I'm, here in Truck and Told, we're not like that kind of a podcast. We're a bit different oriented. I think you're gonna enjoy the experience. At least I'm hoping you will. So I'm gonna quit rambling. I'm gonna fire away. So I would love to hear, starting at the very beginning of your time as Phlox, what was the audition process like for this character?
Now I'm sure, because as my friends will tell you, I will go to the opening of an envelope. So I've done a lot of podcasts and I've done a lot of conventions. So probably 90% of your listeners have heard this story before. But for what it's worth, so I've truncated it. When I got the material, all it said was come in, just one scene, come in with a slight alien accent. It's like, I don't know what that means. So I practiced with the wife, all sorts of different funny voices. My wife just said, nope, 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 stinks, sucks, nope, 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 until the voice that you more or less are familiar with from Phlox. But I thought, I don't know, that's not enough. It sounded vaguely lilty, East Indian kind of thing. Maybe on his home planet he was a bird, and he squawked. So I went in and I auditioned, and, the key thing I think about Phlox was he was buoyant, he was exuberant. So I thought, in moments of joyous transport, or when he was particularly excited, he would go, blah, 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 blah. And I got the job. Like, I guess I'm a bird. So all through the prep stuff, when they're getting the makeup and we're having table reads, I'm thinking, I'm a bird. Nobody says anything. I don't look like a bird. I'm not dressed like a bird. My makeup doesn't make me look like a bird. The creators aren't asking me to be a bird. Should I be like reading about birds? Should I be flapping my arms? I don't know. Am I a bird? I even asked Rick and Brandon after a table read. I'd squawked during the table read. I'd squawked during the network callback. So, am I a bird? And they're very inscrutable cats. They kind of went, It's like, all right, take that to the bank. So first day, first scene that I'm shooting where I would have cause to squawk. Jim Conway was the director. I go, blah, 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 blah. And Jim Conway says, quit fucking around, John, which is how I knew I was not a bird. So that's my audition story. People have said, oh, I don't believe that. But Dominic Keating will testify. He was outside in the lobby when I was going in for my callback with producers, and he heard this guy going, I said, who the hell is that? He's got balls. At first, he thought I was auditioning for his part. He thought, how could he possibly have justified squawking for Dominic, for Reed? Why does Reed squawk?
Yeah, I just heard that story, in fact, on the Shuttlepod show also, because I know you did an appearance with them almost a year ago, not quite a year ago, but yeah, a lot of great stories on that show as well. But kind of digging into the acting side of things, I'm curious to know what sort of homework you did once you got the role in working on a backstory. Like, did you create a backstory for Phlox in your head? Like, what did you do to become the character?
To an extent, but I'm generally speaking, and particularly the older I get, it's on the page. I mean, the scene is fundamentally about a set of actions and intentions, what you're trying to do, and your characterization is really based on your sense of what animates this guy. And this guy was clearly animated by a sense of adventure and curiosity and exuberance. My sense, in a way, was that he came from a species. And I didn't elaborate a very lengthy backstory about his culture because, one, I know anything I come up with is going to be immediately contradicted by the writers. But my sense was that, he was old enough and had lived a long enough life as a long-lived species that for him, this was sort of the last hurrah. So, bye kids, bye wives, bye planet. I'm going to go off, and probably it's a suicide mission. And that's okay. I'm going to go out having fun, exploring the world, and if they blow my head off, so be it. So on that level, you don't necessarily need to kind of do a whole what did my character have for breakfast this morning and 18 genealogical charts. I will say that I thought that perhaps because we'd never heard of Denobulans before, that there are only 9 of us left, and they come from a monastic world, only to later find out that we're the fuck bunny of the galaxy, and we all have we're chock-a-block. So it's like, where are we all then? How come the universe isn't crawling with Denobulans?
I mean, is this part of your theater training where it's kind of like the text is giving you the information as opposed to you going out and doing your own homework to like define the character on your own terms?
I actually think it's an evolution as an actor. When you're younger, you put a lot of attention into what I would think now is extraneous detail. In this conversation right now, there are any number of things that might be passing through your head, but they're thoughts that are related to the conversation we're having. They're not thoughts that are related to your, quote, backstory. We don't walk around with our biographical identities kind of, animating our words and our thinking. It's based on what you're hearing, what you're receiving from your partner, whether or not what you're getting from them, and what you're trying to achieve yourself. So I as I've gotten older, also Sanford Meisner's technique, I think, is much more rooted in that. It doesn't mean that when you're working on a scene, you don't have to find a way to kind of identify emotionally with the stakes of the scene. But and there are any number of different ways to do that. Some people sort of use the famous Strasbergian or Stanislavskian as if. It's as if in my life such and such and such had happened. It's as if my wife was sick. It's as if my cat was dying. It's as if I just lost my job. And you sort of make the imaginative transfer. For whatever reason, I've always been, the word is risible. Like I've always been fairly risible. It doesn't take me a lot to commit to the emotional demands of the scene. So I just buy into the imaginative circumstances without much work needing to get done. Actors have their own strengths and weaknesses. I didn't go to a professional actors training program. I think there are aspects of, for instance, a British actor's craft, the range they might have with both in physical expressiveness, maybe in their dialect work. One thing I just always innately had was a strong ability to make an emotional connection to a text.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've kind of observed over watching many, many years of Star Trek is kind of the responsiveness between, I'd say you and Robert Picardo, I felt like the most responsive and reactive in working with other scene partners. And especially in the way that, Phlox is a very empathetic character. I feel like the way that your character comes off as well, in all the interactions he has with the crew members, it's always typically very empathetic and very, very good at responding, I guess. It's a real great back and forth. I mean, what do you think about that?
I appreciate that. I mean, that's nice to hear. And again, it's sort of where I used to teach Meisner. Sanford Meisner was somebody who put a great amount of emphasis in the nature of how the moment arises from what's really happening based on what you're getting from your acting partner. And that idea of very active listening, engaged listening. You still have a sense of what you're trying to achieve. You have a sense of the stakes. You have a sense of the emotional weight of the moment. So you're not acting in neutral, but the nature of what you're actually getting in the moment is really triggering your behavior. Your behavior cannot be preordained. If actors start either trying to push an emotional state that manifests itself in a certain kind of behavior, or they quirk it up intentionally for effect, then they're in their heads. And you really just need to be extremely present with your acting partner. That has always been. I have all sorts of what I consider to be deep technical deficiencies. And at my age, not having ever been an athlete, I know I don't have the physical stamina that some great actors who managed to, just read an article about Harrison Ford the other day at 80 years old. He's still riding goddamn horses. Yeah. It's like, you could get 8 guys couldn't hoist me onto a horse right now. So, I'm very cognizant of what my skills and my deficiencies are. My skill set was pretty much based in the Meisner training I had, and Bob Picardo, I think, is a wonderful actor for similar reasons.
And I always felt like the interactions, especially between you and Scott Bakula, it felt very, very, very organic. And again, considering that you're playing this Denobulan character, this alien being, and you're having these very human interactions that felt real. And again, I didn't really see that as much with like Gates McFadden, and this is not a knock to any other doctors because they all did wonderful jobs with their material. But I especially feel like something about Phlox, maybe it was just the era of when the storylines are taking place, but it felt just so much more cemented in realism. And again, that responsiveness too. I think especially with you and Scott Bakula, it felt like a lot of just real magic back and forth there. That felt like I'm eavesdropping.
It's funny. I mean, I think I also benefited I don't write the episodes, so the instances where I took exception to the writing. 90% of the time, I felt like they gave me a lot of fun material, and they created my ability to kind of lean in, very like, ooh, can I watch them have sex? Oh, let me eat that food. Oh, Captain, talk to me. I mean, that's there for you to play because they give it to you, and I was lucky in that respect. And also as the alien, I mean, on the ship. The trap of Vulcans is that, one, we all have a strong, and I think Jolene did a great job, but Jolene is not, and the Vulcans no longer really are the repository of curiosity about other species, because we know the Vulcans as well as we know the humans now. You had to have, in a way, a different kind of alien who could kind of lean in and go, ooh, that you could be curious about too, because he was unusual. So that, even though I didn't have as much screen time as other people, I do feel like I sort of had an odd leg up in terms of the nature of the role and what the role allowed me to get to play.
I'm happy you mentioned Jolene also, because just again, rewatching recently to prep for this episode, just seeing her portrayal of a Vulcan, it's such a more nuanced portrayal than I feel like we see throughout all of Star Trek. And I love also watching your two interactions as well. The two aliens on the ship, really also just playing with each other's alienisms as well, if you will. The different manners and different behaviors you guys have. It's a real pleasure watching you guys on screen.
I loved working with it. I mean, I loved working with everybody on that show. I mean, it's like all things. The nature of television is such that you have good episodes and bad episodes. I mean, you got to churn one out every week. And under a tight deadline, sometimes you kind of get throwing up your hands and saying, "Okay, that's the script this week, whether we like it or not." Sometimes I sort of thought Enterprise suffered from a little bit of, oh God, we've done that before. No, we've done that before. We've done that before. Let's just do it anyway. We'll do it again anyway. We'll just change it slightly. Which is why I think sometimes the fans were a little quicker to dismiss Enterprise, because they felt that it was a little more rehashed. But when we hit on all cylinders, I thought the cast was actually quite wonderful and adept at being able to ground the stories in realistic human behavior in ways that I really appreciated. Episodes, to me, like Similitude, I think, is one of my favorite episodes. I thought that was an episode. One, it was a wonderful episode for Connor and Jolene, because it was the episode that really kind of allowed them to truly fall in love.
Yeah.
But they did it in a very interesting way, because it wasn't actually Trip who actually really touched Jolene's heart. It was cloned Trip. And everybody on that episode kind of had the opportunity to be deeply human in the way they related to the Ursat's Trip. And at the same time, the show didn't lose its sense of urgency, because the mission had to continue, and we had no choice. We got to kill this guy.
Yeah.
That to me was Star Trek at its best. The stakes are high. The emotional reality circulates through all the characters. Everybody gets a little time. And it actually does touch on an interesting scientific and ethical issue at the same time.
Yeah, it's actually on my list of questions. In fact, I want to talk about Similitude, because I got to rewatch that one as well. And oh my God, that's like one of the best of Enterprise. It's a
I
brilliant
thought it
episode.
was too. I thought it was too. I thought a lot of the. I think a couple things, and this is no rap on Rick and Brandon, as I've often said. One, they were lovely to me, and they were responsible for years and years and years of great Star Trek. They were not given much of a chance to take a breather before they were asked to take up the cudgel again with Enterprise, and consequently, I think that they maybe didn't have as much of a cogitative space to think about the Bible for the show. When Manny Cotta was brought in the third season, one, he loved Star Trek. He realized that a lot of the freedom he had for a show that was probably not going to last much longer, he got to write, particularly in the final season, some real valentines to Star Trek history. And I think he just brought a point of view and an animating impulse that we needed. And I thought a lot of the last 2 years, it was like, unfortunately, a little too late to get our audience back. But I thought a lot of the last 2 seasons of Star Trek, we were hitting more often than we were missing.
I would absolutely agree. It's such a different show. Like, you guys definitely figured out where you wanted to be, what you wanted to do, where you wanted to go at that point. But, on the topic of
with one exception to me, which is I did take a certain amount of exception to the nature of what the politics of Xindi pursuit meant during the post 9/11 years. Individual episodes nonetheless really benefited from that impulse, that urgency. I just, the Xindi thing kind of rankled a little bit, but
I feel like those moments, especially when we get into that part of Enterprise, it becomes a lot more recurrent than other Enterprise, than other Star Treks have been, because typically it has been just those big overarching moral stories that can be very ambiguous. But you're right. I mean, when Enterprise started doing what they were doing, I mean, it's very clearly this is post 9/11 America. This is our analogy to it in Star Trek world.
Yeah, and although when the Xindi episodes were resolved, as was pointed out to me recently, and I'd forgotten about this, it turned out that the various buggy creatures were actually themselves being manipulated, and you could read into that, if you're of a political mindset, what the critique really was perhaps a critique of those forces that use our speciesism, racism, culturalism, us against the other, to manipulate us. When it premiered, when the third season premiered, it was hard not to kind of feel, for me, a little bit like, post 9/11, here we are, the evil bugs have attacked us, and all bets are off. Anything goes. Let's go fucking destroy them. Right as we're trying to decide whether to invade Iraq, it's like, I don't like this voice. And I'm extremely political, as those of you who are watching may know, and I tend not to, hide my light under a bushel. For me, one of the great post 9/11 mistakes was to confuse justice with vengeance. And when I consider what happened, and I think when we all consider what happened after 20 plus years of occupying Afghanistan and all the years and treasure spent in Iraq and the horrible results of that fiasco, there's always that little part of me with the Xindi episodes that thought,
Yeah, I wanted to actually ask you sort of a similar thing about that, which was if you'd ever had any episodes on Enterprise that had a topic that maybe hit too close to home for you. I mean, would you say that was the one, or was there something else that maybe was a little bit closer for you?
There was an episode, and again, I love Manny, and I think Manny's a wonderful writer. And I did 24. I mean, none of us are pure. I ain't pure. I mean, I've done Fox shows, even though I against Rupert Murdoch. You live in this culture, and no one's unsullied. There was an episode where I felt that, to me, Manny was kind of justifying torture, and that's the episode where Scott Bakula is prepared to say, I'm going to push you, alien captain, out of the fucking airlock if you don't give me the information I need. And in that sense, the ends justify the means philosophy, I think, again, this is against a cultural backdrop. Abu Ghraib, black box, renditioning, waterboarding. To me, if you become that which you say is vile, then where is the moral distinction? And we as a country were condoning torture. And I felt like we put an episode on that on one level condoned torture. That was the episode that, to me, was like, Now, people's perceptions are very different, and it wasn't as if T'Pol in that episode said you cannot do this. So it wasn't as if both sides of this were not presented. But the captain is usually ultimately viewed as the final repository of moral goodness in the Star Trek world. So when the show kind of leans towards the captain's point of view in the end, as I think it does almost inevitably, it's hard not to feel like that was where we came down on the subject.
I mean, Star Trek has always been a very political thing, and even as a kid, and I think I've spoken to a lot of folks who don't agree with me on this, but I always felt like watching DS9 the very first time, I was like, is this meant to be like the Middle East crisis? Like some reason in my head, I felt like that's what it was. And seeing Enterprise as well, first time, I'm like, is Scott Bakula, his version of Captain Archer, is this meant to be like an analog to Bush if Bush was in Starfleet times? I mean, did you feel like that at all?
Only at times during the third season, and not all the time. But at times. I didn't disagree that it was valuable to have a third season that had more tension and more impulse. I thought it was very smart and astute to come up with a crisis. And playing devil's advocate, given that 9/11 had occurred, it made perfect sense to say, hey, if we're going to do something on our show that's about, propulsion, we better come up with something that has, some fucking, stakes in a way that resonates for an audience. So I get all the thinking behind it. And candidly, I would also have to go back and watch the whole third season again before I truly began to fulminate, because my perceptions could be skewed. I haven't seen the third season in years. I'm just reporting my memory of what I felt at the time.
Sure.
And it didn't, look, I didn't go in and throw the gauntlet down. Who the fuck am I? I'm not saying, I'm on strike. I'm not going to appear in this episode. I found that there were moments in the third season that I considered to be problematic.
Well, on a less serious note, I bet we jump into a different area for a bit here. This is definitely a different area. I want to talk about the food on Enterprise, because I've heard stories about the food made by the late Dorothy Duder. Yes, right.
Segued. Yes, sir.
Absolutely none there whatsoever. But yeah, I've heard so many good things about her food. I've seen like bloopers, outtakes of the stars forgetting their lines because the food was so great. So I'd love to hear any stories you have about Dorothy's food.
Well, it's oddly, I've sort of a bifurcated response, because I was the guy who loved to eat on the show. I was always wanting to eat different shit. I also, as an actor, if you commit to eating, you're fucked, because you got a match. If you got a big old bite of turkey, like, in The Master, then, on your close-ups, one, it's hard to articulate. Two, there's a certain urgency to a scene, even a scene that's a little more, relaxed. So I always tried to kind of like, play the scene like, well, I'd always stop just short of having a bite. So I was served a lot of amazing food. Hardly any of it did I ever eat. And she'd always ask me, it's like, what do you eat? What do you not eat? It's like, I don't care, because I'm probably not going to eat it if I can avoid it. There were some scenes when I had no choice. And yes, it was always good. But a note to young actors watching: in any food eating scene, don't eat the food. You can get away with it. Don't eat the food.
Yeah, because who knows how long it's been sitting out also.
No. Just to make sure that the scene, the rhythm of the scene, is not dictated by the fact you're having to fucking eat.
Very true.
It's mostly about it's funnier and more interesting to me to play a scene in which you're always about to eat, but you keep getting interrupted, or which you've got it poised on your fork the whole time, but you're so intense on what you're doing that you never really can quite be bothered to get it into your mouth, or you're just finishing the meal so that your last bite is like, register of satisfaction. Anything you can do to play something other than having to digest on camera.
That is a great tip, actually. And I have no segue for this question either. I'm just going to toss it your way here, but I want to talk about the episode Doctor's Orders. And really, besides the fact that we see Phlox's bare feet, which are certainly suitable for like a Hobbit's OnlyFans page, I do want to get to Naked Phlox, because first time watching it, I'm like, wow, okay, that's unexpected. Yes. There's got to be some stories there. So Naked Phlox on set, how's that going for you?
Well, for one thing, I don't know if this is true, but this is a story I've been telling for years because it amuses me. Early on, I think it was the second season, maybe it was even in the first season, there was a writer, Chris Black, and I was at a party with him. I think it was at Brandon's house. And I was making fun of the fact that everybody in the show runs around in their undie pants. When am I going to get to run around in my undie pants? And he said, well, maybe Denobulans, maybe you don't run around in your undie pants. Maybe just run around in here all together. And I said, fine, bring it on, motherfucker. And, it's like tick-tock. Chris leaves the show. I thought, oh, well, that's that. Then third season, there I am running around in the All Together. I thought, is that the legacy of Chris Black? Did he leave that note for them in the office? I'm leaving, but Billingsley has to be naked before this show is over. I suggested that when I walk into the room, when I walk into sickbay, I turn sharply to the left, and all the way across the room, a flower pot falls to the ground. They said no. They always kiboshed my great ideas, which were usually prurient or filthy or somehow problematic. But Picardo, as I've often said, he could just waltz into their offices and say, I want to be an opera singer. I want to have a love affair with 7 of 9. And they go, oh, yes, Bob, anything you say, Bob. Me? Huh. I had an idea. I'm telling all the stories I always tell. People who watch me must get sick to death. Can't you get better stories, Billingsley? There was an idea I had, which is that we pick up a Denobulan ship in distress, and we bring all the Denobulans on board, and they're all like Oscar Madison. They just leave their dirty dishes around. They leave their dirty underpants around. They don't bathe. They smell. They have
cigars everywhere.
Look, yeah, it's like, but they all look like me. That was my pitch. That went nowhere. What if the Denobulans all look the same? What if they all just look like me? Then I would put a marker down that no matter what happens years from now, no matter what show they do, if they cast a Denobulan, they have to cast me.
And would you have just played all the parts by yourself then? Would that have been the goal, maybe?
Yeah. It would have been a tour de force. It would have gotten an Emmy nomination. Yeah.
And especially if they were all naked, maybe you would, yeah.
I know. Yeah. They didn't. They started locking the door. I had to slip my ideas under the door, and then they'd come back out again, like the guy on the other side. I was like, no. Geez.
And the doors were allergic to paper, right? Just seems spitting them right out.
Yeah, I know. Man, all right, fine.
Trek Untold will return momentarily.
Trek Untold is sponsored by Triple Fiction Productions. Celebrating 15 years in business in 2023, TFP creates 3D printed Star Trek and sci-fi inspired items that fit into any collection. Whether you're a cosplayer who wants a Starfleet phaser, a Bajoran tricorder, or a Klingon dagger, or a toy collector looking for that special accessory or diorama to make your figures truly stand out, Triple Fiction Productions has exactly what you need. And for you figure fanatics, that includes products that are the perfect size for Galoob, Mego, Playmates, and everything in between. All products are 3D printed in the US, with new designs constantly being updated on their website. Repeat customers can sign up for TFP's loyalty program for free, which is a great way to save money as you build your collection. Repeat customers can sign up for TFP's loyalty program for free, which is a great way to save money as you build your collection. Repeat customers can sign up for TFP's loyalty program for free, where the more you order, the more discounts you receive. TFP also has a pay what you want section, where clearance or misprinted items are available at a discounted price. Best of all, every product can be shipped worldwide. As a special bonus for listeners of this show, Trek Untold has a special discount code just for you. Enter Untold10 at checkout for 10% off of all orders with no minimum purchase required. That's 10% off using Untold10. To see all of their products, head to triple-fictionproductions.net. Or to stay up to date on their newest products, find them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Triple Fiction Productions, where something is only impossible until it happens.
Are you looking for the perfect fashion statement to show you're a geek and proud of it? Well, welcome to Geek Girls Castle, where I make fun and functional geeky clothing and accessories for every occasion. My name is Missy, and I started creating my own gear and apparel in 2015 to bring nerdy products to the geek girl population, which does include all LGBTQA+, non-binary, and POC and BIPOC folks. I couldn't find anything for us gals except t-shirts, so I decided to combine my passion for fashion with my fandoms, ranging from handmade skirts with really large pockets, travel accessories like toiletry bags, luggage tags, and zippered pouches. I also embroider nerdy items for home decor like wall hangings and hand towels, and products like keychains, bookmarks, and journal covers. Need something to carry all that in? Well, I make great bags to put all those accessories into or onto. Whether you like Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, Marvel, DC, and everything else in between, there is something for every geek girl. My website is constantly updated with new styles and fandoms, no matter what time or dimension you come from. If you'd like to browse my products or ask for something custom, visit me at geekgirlscastle.com. That's geekgirlscastle.com.
All right, so John, I put notice out there on social media, as I mentioned earlier, that I was talking to you, and I got tons of fan questions here. And I know you said we've kind of rehashed a few stories you told on all sorts of different other podcasts, other conventions. We're going to see if we can crack the shell and get some new stuff here.
Good luck.
I know, right?
I've been doing this for 20 years. I challenge
You're a pro. I'm swimming
you.
upstream today, John. Well, I got one here from Molly Jackson, and this one goes back to acting technique here. So she had heard Garrett Wang talk in an interview about how on Star Trek, the human actors were told to downplay their emotions so that the aliens could be more alien. Were you ever given any directions like that?
No. I mean, I'm not disputing that. That could be, but I to my knowledge, that was never. No one ever said anything to anybody about any, grand sweeping, methodology by which they should act or perform. I never heard anything like that.
All right. Well, how about this one here from Will Orr? And Will wants to know, Dr. Phlox's character was gregarious by nature and enjoyed being in large crowds with lots of people. So do you share that in common with Dr. Phlox? And if so, how did you cope during lockdown of the pandemic? And how do you think Phlox would have behaved?
Well, oddly enough, what always sort of struck me as interesting about the nature of the way they portrayed Phlox is that while he came from a planet with, where, gajillion people, he actually did not like to be touched. Yep. Denobulans had very, very odd and rigid and somewhat interesting rules about physical contact. They did not kiss. They did not believe in public displays of emotion. Their sexual habits sounded like, they were hyper elaborated. So yes, they were very social creatures, but they were not necessarily tactile creatures, oddly. Or if they were, it was within a surprisingly rigid set of social boundaries. I always thought that was very unusual. In terms of the socialization, personally, a miracle of Zoom. Certainly missed a lot of my pals getting to fraternize with them in person. And I am, yes, very much like Phlox in that respect. In fact, I'm having a wonderful Christmas because we're going out and seeing everybody right now. But I'm very happily married. And that is, my wife is the most important person in my life. So even during lockdown, although I had the same frustrations as everybody did, that, you're feeling like some wonderful aspects of the texture of life have gone away, the heart and soul of my life is my partner. And so, I was very lucky in that respect. Phlox, I imagine, would probably have, as you can see, my biggest love is reading. And I'm sure that outside of my wife, I never know where she can be lurking. I'm sure Phlox would have found ways to say, in this situation, under these circumstances, I turn that part of my brain that is delighted in doing other things that are slightly more monastic in nature in that direction. And that's so much about what life is, you grow older, life throws you all sorts of curveballs. And in the end, you have to find ways to enjoy what life allows you instead of mourning that which life does not allow you. I don't have the career that I once had, or that I might have at one point in my life wished to have had. So I do other things instead, and I do those things with as much a joy as I did when I was acting. I now put much more of my time in my life into social service work, and that's what I think one has to do as one lives one's life. It's one of the things I loved about Phlox. I play any number of like serial killers and child molesters and lunatics and, frankly, disagreeable people. Dr. Phlox was like the one time in my career where I got to play somebody who I actually am like. So, which may be why people like that role. It's odd because looking back, I didn't realize at the time what a gift it was for me to play somebody who had, such an agreeable nature.
And even hearing that response, it's like I'm trying to figure out if it's actually John telling me that or if it's Phlox telling me that, because it feels like that's the thing he would say.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's not like I've watched the shows in a long time. And I don't know how cognizant I even was at the time, but with the passage of time, and particularly because I have always really loved, candidly, have really loved the nature of what Trek has allowed me to do, to have kind of a public persona in relationship to the fans. I love the conventions. I'll always do podcasts. I'm always happy to chat with people, in part because I realized that Phlox was a gift that keeps on giving, because I do really believe in his philosophy. I absolutely adore what he stands for. You know, I really respect the fact that this is a guy who, you know, again, to me was like, I'm going to go off on this space mission with a bunch of people from species, I don't know, from Adam, and probably I'm not going to come back alive, but what a chance to have a blast. And let's do it, because life is short and it should be an adventure, and it should be about, you know, about curiosity. Was one other thing that was interesting to me about the show. To a certain extent, to be honest with you, I kind of think the show could have gone a little further in this direction. As the first ship, the weapons explode. We don't trust the transporter. What do? We just met a hostile species. Do we go? Do we run? Do we stop? Do we talk? Do we fight? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? I kind of wish they'd gone a little bit further in the direction of some of the emotional chaos of that. You know, if there was anything that I always kind of not objected to, but wanted to argue with Star Trek about, you know, the movies of Robert Altman.
Yes.
I kind of wanted a little bit. Can we have overlapping dialogue? Can we have some of the clusterfuckedness of what it would be like when nobody actually agrees on what to do, but the clock is ticking? I thought our show maybe could have broken some of the stylistic verities of Star Trek. You know, it started to do it insofar as the design of the ship was very, you know, it was like a submarine. It felt much more, you know, tight and narrow and constricted and cramped. I was a guy who leached people instead of, you know, sticking it with a hypo spray. I would have liked to have seen the show go a little further in that direction. And I thought it unfortunately bent back to being a little bit more standard issue Trek, where, you know, meh, you have cancer. Meh, I've cured you. We'll take the shuttle pod down and we'll, you know, beam. It all became a little bit too easy in a way, in my opinion.
It definitely would have been interesting. That's a great point. I mean, I've never really looked at it in that way before. And the fact that, yeah, like people don't really talk over each other, even when they're having arguments or conflicts, you rarely kind of see that. It's all very much just such structured type of writing.
Yeah. And it's just, you know, it's interesting because and hey, you don't argue with success. I mean, we were the fourth iteration of Star Trek from Next Gen, not counting the original series. And who am I to say that, you know, maybe you should mix it up more? Some of why I don't think our show survived more than 4 seasons is because we were on UPN, itself a dying network. I don't think there was that much that they could have done differently. And yet, it's not, I think, wrong to say our premiere attracted an audience of 10 to 12 million. The second episode attracted about 2 million. Something didn't resonate for people. I could be completely wrong about what that is. And I've talked to a lot of different people who have different opinions about what that is. In my opinion, one of the things that I would have liked to have seen is you know, a greater stylistic shift away in every respect. When you're flipping the channels, you know, in a millisecond, your brain registers that you've landed on a Star Trek show because it's lit the same way. It's designed the same way. There's so much about it that's just like, you know, canon. Some of the shows now, you know, mix that up a little bit more.
This next question actually works out really well because we're going to basically expand on a little bit of what you're talking about with that previous question. Rafael Faria on Instagram wants to know, in what way do you identify with the character of Phlox? And also a little bit more fun here. What do you think about polygamy in the Star Trek cultural context?
As any man who's ever been married would tell you, it's like polygamy.
Yeah, it's dangerous territory here, Raphael.
I can barely do one wife. First question first. I think in terms of what resonates for me with Dr. Phlox, as I mentioned, I think, you know, his adventurous spirit, his curiosity, his passion for experience, his desire to poke his nose into shit, his obvious a wide array of interests. There was one episode, for instance, late in the I think this was late third season, maybe it was even fourth season, after the Xindi disaster, we go to Earth, and Phlox won't go down to the surface because he's afraid that, you know, the xenophobia might be. That was a moment when I really wanted to go, no, 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 no. I don't think that Phlox would have that reaction. Not that I'm going to, like, you know, going to parachute into a bar in the wilds of Baluchistan and just saunter in and say, "Hey, people, how you doing? How you Baluchis doing?" I am not as brave as Dr. Phlox, but I admire the spirit. No rap on the Baluchistanis. I'm just happy to be reading a book about Baluchistan and it just popped into my head. Fascinating culture.
I didn't even know that was a real place, so thank you for telling me that.
Yes, it spans Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. I'm just reading an amazing book called Ghost Wars, which is about the American presence in Afghanistan from the beginning of the Russian invasion up until 9/11 by a guy named Steve Coll, Coll, which is a very, very interesting book. Anyway, as to polygamy, you know, if it put it this way, polygamy as is practiced in, say, Mormonism seems to me to be not terribly feministic. If there was a culture that actually practiced polygamy in a feministic way, so, you know, it's like everybody in the pool together, and you know, any marriage arrangement that everybody could agree with is fine. That's, you know, let 100 flowers bloom, as Chairman Mao said. I hate to quote Chairman Mao because he did kill a lot of people, but I do love let 100 flowers bloom. I change it to let 1,000 flowers bloom because 100 doesn't seem like enough flowers to me.
I mean, you basically made it your own, so now we can just credit that quote to you and not Mao.
Yeah. Fuck you, Chairman Mao. Billingsley's taking it away from you. As John Billingsley said.
Yeah, since we are sort of in your library space as well, too, I'd like to hear, this is now a me question. What is the book that perhaps changed your perspective on the way you look at the world?
I don't think of it that way. I think actually in a weird way, that's one of the things that I always sort of like roll my eyes about when people kind of like, you know, pound the Bible. It's a wonderful moment at the end of Inherit the Wind when the character is a stand-in for Clarence Darrow sort of slams the Bible and Darwin's Origin of the Species together and suggests that, you know, both points of view have to be heard. Books are a great passion of my life. And to me, it is the cumulative effect of a multiplicity of voices, which is certainly the Star Trek argument, that mature you and that give you a sophisticated point of view. I can't think of a single, you know, to say that there's a single book that changed my worldview would be to kind of deny to me what the true power of books are. There are books that I, you know, stay in my memory. The Infinite Jest, which is kind of a love-hate book. If you happen to like David Foster Wallace, I think it's extraordinary. I can understand why people throw it across the room very early because one, is extremely dense, and two, it's not exactly plot-driven, although it's got, you know, enormous plot strands. But it's one of the best books I've ever read about the about addiction, about the nature of addiction, how we all are addicts. We're infotainment addicts. We're you know, obviously we're drug addicts and booze addicts and painkiller addicts. But his fundamental argument is we become addicted to the things that take us away from a deep dive into what it means to be, you know, inhabiting our own tormented bodies. We're escaping from our souls. And I thought that was quite a lovely, although funny and dense exploration of what it is to be in flight from ourselves.
Now, one of my Patreon supporters, Shalom Bresticker, wants to know.
Wait, say that name again. What a great name that is.
I hope I'm saying it right, Shalom. I'm not. I'm so sorry.
I don't know, but
I hope it's Bresticker or Bresticker. I don't know if the right way. I'm so sorry, Shalom. But thank you for the question.
I tell you,
But yeah, he wants to know. Dr. Phlox has a very wide smile, and it looks too wide to be natural. And me inserting here, I assume he's probably talking about the computer-generated smile, which is like that super long one that you do, but. You do have a pretty distinct. There we go. Yeah, that's the face right there. I think he's probably talking about that.
I don't know why I happen to have this handy, but I just happened to have it handy. It was really completely coincidental. That's a digital effect. It costs $10,000, and that's why you don't see it very often. Because once the ratings began to plummet, nobody wanted to spend $10,000 on the doctor's puss.
Yeah. But, you know, I did want to note, since, you know, watching the show again, you do have a pretty wide smile on that show. You have a very distinct smile. I don't know how much of that is the makeup, how much of that is you. I mean, was that something that you did for the character, or is that just basically John showing up on screen?
Well, I think to a certain extent, when it's, even though the digital smile was not used again, you start from the premise that this guy is amused by so much. I mean, he walks around amused a lot, which is a trait I share with him. I think life is rich in Chekhovian comedy. So for me, there's a sense that even when things are ridiculous, disastrous, painful, there's a part of me that just has to laugh at the comedy of the human tragedy, or the tragedy of the human comedy. I think Phlox had kind of that similar bent. So yeah, I think he is smiling a lot. It's like humans. Yeah, we're all gonna die, but oh dear heavens, humans.
Well, I got a very important one right now. This is from my mom, in fact, because she's following me on Instagram too. So hi, Mom.
Wow.
This is from Barbara, and she would like to know about your time on Stargate SG-1, which, to be honest, I always ask about because of her. So she specifically demanded I ask you this question, since she's a giant Richard Dean Anderson fan. So she would love to hear any stories you have about working with Mr. RDA. Not just that, but also what you thought about the character and Dr. Felger getting to essentially be a Trek nerd too.
Well, the fun thing about that one, I'm not sure if this is true. I think it's true. When I was on Star Trek, I was number 7 on the call sheet, so I had episodes. I didn't have that much to do, and they very graciously. In fact, I had a little song which I always like to sing called "Day Off." Day off, day off. 6 days off, and the checks still come. Used to sing it for the other actors to irritate them. The producers let me double dip. I went off and angled for work elsewhere, and I got offered this gig on Stargate, and they were clearly thinking it would be fun to have somebody who was on Star Trek come in and be the character that's like, Star Trek. So the nice thing was, as opposed to on Star Trek where every word is precious, I mean, you drop a the or a but or a though, and it's like cut, I'll do it again. Stargate was like, here's a script, but if you've got better ideas. And I do think that, although I didn't really have a chance to work with him very closely, I do think some of that was a spirit infused by Richard Dean Anderson, who had a very kind of, an understanding of the playful nature of the show and a desire to help create a show that was self-conscious in that regard. That was in on its own joke. So the guy I got to work with, Patrick McKinnon, who was a wonderful Canadian comedian, famous for his turns on the Red Black show, specifically Red Black, Red Green, yeah. I didn't know of him, but I adored working with him. I just had so much fun with him. And everybody else was sweet too, but most of my time was with Patrick. Just, the two of us kind of bumbling around the ship and, making, like, don't shoot me, Jesus Christ, put that gun down. Oh, I only want to one. It was like getting to play Laurel and Hardy. And I loved it. They brought him back, but they didn't bring me back. So.
Crimes against humanity.
I know. So, from having this be a wonderful experience, it went into being the worst experience of my life.
Lousy Stargate.
Bastards. I know. Richard Dean Anderson also had it written into his contract, which, you're a star. I don't think he had to work like, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, or Thursday. I mean, anyway, he had a private plane. So, he'd shoot all of his shit out by midweek, and then he kind of, fly off back to the States, wave goodbye. It's like, at the end of MASH, they're waving goodbye to the Koreans still left on the ground in Korea. They're like, bye, bye, Richard. So it did mean that, the days when he worked, they were long days.
Yeah.
So we had some long days with Richard. But then the days when Richard was gone, there was a general sense of like, Dad's gone. So it was a sportive set, as I recall.
Well, on the note of other things that aren't Star Trek too, we got one from Philip Watson here, and he has a good one, I think. I don't know if you talked about this one too much.
Okay.
He wants to hear about working with Denzel Washington on the massively underrated film Out of Time. And I love a good Denzel story in this show too. He seems like a genuinely good guy. So, I mean, is he really that way? I mean, what's it like to be with Denzel?
So again, that was a film I got to shoot while I was on Star Trek. And again, they were extremely gracious to me, and they let me bop back and forth. Here's a funny story about that movie. That Carl Franklin and Denzel worked together on Devil in a Blue Dress, and Don Cheadle was also in that movie. Denzel thought that Don Cheadle had been lauded in part by Carl at his expense. So when it came time to working on another movie together, Denzel had approval who you cast, and he turned down every name actor that was going to play his sidekick, and I was the only guy left standing because I was a nobody. So the only reason I got that part was because Denzel didn't want to be, as Carl Franklin put it, Don Cheadled again. So I always have sort of an ironic appreciation. It's like, thank you, Denzel. I would not have gotten this part if not for you. But the reason I got it is because in your eyes, I was dog poo. So go figure. Amazing to work with, obviously. I mean, an incredible, to our conversation earlier, an incredibly present actor in the moment. He's he's a very kinetic, electric, physical actor, and he's very keyed in the scene. And so they let us improv. And I like that. I like to have that level of playfulness in the scene. And it was great. When the camera was rolling, it was great. And Carl Franklin is a fabulous director. And I would agree with your question. I thought that was a very underrated, pulp movie, but done with great style and panache. And I loved working with everybody in it and the ladies as well. Unfortunately, they released it in the fall, which is kind of, as anybody who follows the American movies knows, is now the death season. If it ain't a summer blockbuster and it ain't a prestige Oscar picture, which comes out in December, it ain't nothing in American cinema. And that movie consequently disappeared.
Ouch. Well, I
thought that movie, because I got actually a fair amount of attention for it. I thought that movie was going to actually kind of like take me from here to here. And it didn't. Consequently, I've never really had a film career. I've done a lot of television, but although I've maybe done 30 or 40 films, most of them have been, like, what was that film? It's like, exactly. Yeah. So, that was one of those times in an actor's career, which happens to so many of us, when it's like, you've got the brass ring, it's in your finger, and it goes around, and you realize, oh, I just lost my finger.
That's a good analogy. But I mean, to be fair, the upside is, there's other Star Trek actors who didn't have the opportunity to go on other shows. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Terry Farrell ended up leaving Deep Space Nine, was due to that kind of thing.
It was the first couple of years. And to a certain extent, I kind of felt like I might have shot my wad on out of time, because they really bent over backwards to accommodate me. I mean, I was flying back and forth to Miami and, flying out in the middle of an episode and coming back to complete the episode. And I didn't want to push my luck, so I didn't necessarily do quite as much outside of the show in seasons 3 or 4. I as the guy who wore the rubber head, I got to say, when the show was canceled, I might have been the only person who had decidedly mixed emotions. I think everybody else was very upset. One, we all knew it was coming. I certainly knew it was coming. It was a miracle we made 4 seasons. But when the word came down we weren't coming back, it was a little bit like, well, that's a shame. 2.5 hours to put on, 45 minutes to take off, those contact lenses, which hurt your eyes. I really liked the guy, and I liked my fellow actors, and I really loved being part of the franchise. I'm never going to wear a rubber head again.
Fair enough. I don't think I could do it either.
I didn't have it as bad as some people. I mean, it's like, God forbid you're a Borg.
Oh, yeah.
Or Armin with those teeth. Oy.
And we just had on the show, you may remember him as well, Scott McDonald, who was Commander Dolam in Enterprise. He was telling us about being all the different characters he played, Dolam being one of the rougher ones, but he was telling me about when he did Tosk on Deep Space Nine, that was like 6-hour makeup each time.
Yeah, no way.
No, thank you.
I knew Scott from Seattle. I used to live in Seattle, and we were both actors, although our paths really never crossed professionally up there.
He did a lot of great theater work, I think, in Seattle, if I remember.
Yeah. I had a theater company in Seattle for many years, which is still around, called Book It, which adapts fiction for the stage. started as short form adaptation, short stories verbatim, and then moved into longer form adaptation, where you actually are taking a novel and finding a way to turn it into an abbreviated version of itself as a play. But unfortunately, you can't make a living in the theater.
No. Well, it is kind of fun, though, because Scott brought this up, and I've had other guests bring it up as well who are from the world of theater, and they say that especially Star Trek itself, it's like so theatrical and especially so Shakespearean. I'm like smashing show and so together because of Shakespeare, but it's very Shakespearean, very theatrical kind of acting experience. And did you feel the same way once you started to get on that bridge of the Enterprise?
It's funny because I hear that a lot, and it's certainly true and I suppose it is true that it always helps to have a theater background. I mean, it just helps to have a theater background no matter what you do. If you have a theater background, you are, I think, going to be that much more adroit when it comes to taking a scene apart and analyzing it quickly and figuring out what the actions and the intentions are and figuring out where the transitions are and figuring out how to button a scene in a way that has some, emotional weight. There's just a lot of things you learn from a career on stage that help feed your ability to work in other mediums. I don't know that I necessarily agree that Star Trek is a particularly more fruitful place for stage actors, or you could only be on Star Trek really and succeed if you had a stage background. I hear that a lot. I've heard that a lot. I just don't know that in my experience I necessarily think that's true. I suppose it is arguably true that if you've got a face of prosthetics, that to play through the rubber, you may have to justify some size. And certainly if you're, a Klingon or some of the other more bellicose species, it's written into the script that you've got a certain kind of, robustiousness. But generally speaking, I kind of feel like good acting on camera is nuanced acting. It's not, you don't have to hit the back wall. That's why I like it more than theater. In the end, George Bernard Shaw had a famous expression that the quality of the performance is rooted in the optics of the space, meaning that if you're performing in a 3,000 foot, 3,000 seat auditorium and you're not mic'd, you've got to justify in your choices a reason why you're talking in like this. Every scene has to come from a place of size, or you're not going to hear it in the back row. I love on camera acting because I don't have to think about that at all. I'm just communicating the way I'm communicating with you. Sometimes I raise my voice, sometimes I lower my voice, but fundamentally, I do not have to think about the stylistic choices. I'm simply having a conversation. And I think that's true in any television show.
I think that might be one of the reasons I personally like Phlox so much, is because it doesn't feel like the person playing Phlox is like making sure that people in the back row can hear him. It feels like he's much more reserved and pulled back and able to, because of that, be a little more of a human kind of character.
Yeah, I mean, and that's maybe why I tend not to think in terms of, when I hear the word Shakespearean, I tend to, which Armin Shimmerman, I'm sure if he was here, would go, no, because in the reality is that when you are a Shakespearean actor, what you have the ability to do is interpret an extraordinarily demanding text, rich in linguistic challenges, in a way that hits every single complicated thought in a way that makes it clear to the audience. That is not about size. That's about intelligence. And in that sense, I think, a good actor is always a good Shakespearean actor, because he can intelligently figure out how to bring a lot from a text.
Well, far off in left field away from Shakespeare, I had a few different people here ask me about this TV show. They wanted to hear about your time on the Orville. And you got to do that episode with Mr. Bob Picardo, who we've talked about a bunch today, and also Molly Hagan, who has been on this very podcast and talked about working with you guys as well. So it seemed like it was a fun time. The stories I've heard so far were good things about it. You were wonderful in that role, too. It was a great episode. Do you have any memories from working on that set?
Well, one, I love Bob and I love Molly, and I also got to love the woman who played my wife, whose name is escaping me.
And also mine, because I forgot to write it down. But I will put a little note here on the video version so people will know exactly who it was.
I know one of your readers one of your listeners is going to call in. She was fabulous. And so I, the four of us, old crusty senior citizens, I think we all had a grand time together. Molly, who I had known from from other shows. She'd actually played my wife on a short-lived show, the name of which is escaping me, with Johnny Lee Miller a few years before. And at the time, I was a board president of the Hollywood Food Coalition, and everywhere I went, I was carrying around my business cards. So I got to fan my various business cards out, including as I was involved in some other charitable pursuits. But I particularly focused on the Hollywood Food Coalition, and I cajoled Molly into joining our board. Uh-huh. So the Orville always has a soft spot in my heart, because from the Orville came Molly's involvement, and although she's left our board, she was integral to our growth, and it was such a meaningful addition for me to the team. Love working with Bob. Love sticking his hand in spoiler alert, in a pot of boiling soup. I got to play an unregenerate villain. My just desserts, however, in the end, spoiler alert, shot Columbus to death. People ask me, "You're going to come back from the Orville?" It's like, did you see the episode?
Well, that's the beauty of prosthetics, John. You can always come back with a different alien, right?
Shade might come back. My specter might haunt you, I suppose. I will say this. Seth MacFarlane supposedly does an amazing Dr. Phlox impersonation, and he was on the set every day. It was like, come on, I want to hear it. And we would never do it. I don't know why. Like, come on.
I could definitely see him being able to do it. He has like the kind of similar voice. I feel like he could pull that off.
He can do, he's an amazing talent. He can imitate anything. So yes, I'm sure he could do it. I don't know why he suddenly gets shy. Seth MacFarlane gets shy with me. I don't know. My other story, though, that I also will tell. Bob Picardo they cast because he's Bob Picardo. Me, I get a call from my agent. Do you want to audition for the Orville? It's like, all right. I auditioned for the Orville. I suspect that it was like, the tape crosses the desk. It's like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, he played Dr. Phlox. Sure, let's cast him. This reminds you, in this business, out of sight, out of mind. It's not like anybody was thinking, here's a great idea. Fortuity. I knew that, which is why when I auditioned, it was like, all right, I'll work hard on this audition because it would be fun. But damn you, that is no offer.
That's why you wore your FU Bob Picardo shirt to the audition.
It wasn't Bob's fault.
So you kind of alluded to some of these characters earlier, and since we are on the topic of villains, here's an actual segue. Todd Smits wants to know about your time as the serial killer George in 2 episodes of Cold Case, which I never, I knew the show existed, never really watched it. It wasn't my type of show to watch, but I was able to find them, and again, another masterful performance, but yikes, you were like really creepy and scary, and it's a very complex character too. Like, it's a great role for you, and just you really reveled in being the serial killer, it feels like.
I've been villains a lot. I was a serial killer on NYPD Blue. I was a very different kind of serial killer. That was more sort of like a blustering blue collar type cab driver who is a racist who kills a black fare and then decides that, maybe he should just kill all his black fares. And I played a rapist who abducts like 13-year-old girls and drags them into warehouses. I've been a villain a lot, which always makes me laugh because I wouldn't hurt a fly. I'm too scared. The fly might have a family. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, flies. Yes, George was, his shtick was that he liked to abduct people, women, take them out into the woods, make them strip to their underwear, because this is network television, just to the underwear. They don't take anything more off. Make them run around in the woods until they, eventually collapsed. And then he would shoot them with his hunting rifle, which I thought was like, that is a rather strange conglomeration of despicableness, but all right. So they catch him. And then he really fancies himself to be smarter than anybody else. So he takes great delight in having been caught because he knows they can't prove it. And that first episode was kind of fun because, although there were standard issue television tropes that I always kind of roll my eyes about, such as after having proven in interrogation after interrogation that he's absolutely unflappable, she manages to find his one weakness and she gets him to almost crumble because he can't control himself. And it's like, all right. But nonetheless, I get away with it. And I was the only person in Cold Case that ever gets away with it. And I walk away and, there's this very kind of poignant song playing as all the cops are like ready to punch the walls because they see this horrible guy walking away. Well, they couldn't let me get away with it. So they bring me back. for the finale. And long story short, spoiler alert, this show was on like 20 years ago, so it's not too good. I basically abduct the lead cop, and we have this long, tense tete-a-tete, all of which ends with me essentially handing her my gun, roughly speaking, saying, go ahead and shoot me. For no real fucking reason. So I thought it was kind of a, mind you, I cashed a check, but I thought it was kind of a lame finale. However, that said, the woman who wrote those episodes, fabulous writer, generally speaking. I just didn't think unfortunately, she had to conform to certain aspects of network television. She went on, I think her name is Mina Sood, to do the Americanized version of a famous Scandinavian cop show. I think it's called The Killing, which was set in the Pacific Northwest, which is fabulous. I might be garbling the name. So anyway, it's probably more than you wanted to know about that show. Nice folks, like that cast.
No, yeah, not at all though. I mean, it was very cool. I mean, being very unfamiliar with the show, watching it, it's pretty good TV, I got to say, and I really like what you did with it. I mean, again, it's not like a mustache twirling, top hat wearing villain. Like, there's some actual complexity and nuance to this guy here. I appreciated that.
No, well, good. I mean, there are when you have a little more room to work with, Sometimes, it's a scene or two, and that's all there is to play. It really, it's on the page or it's not on the page. This one no one ever asked about because no one's ever seen it. There was a short-lived show called Martial Law, and that
was on my next questions actually, because I always ask my guests about martial law because I watched that show.
You did not, you liar.
I asked Armin Sherman about it. I can run down the list of folks I've asked about that show. I love Sammo Hung. I watched that show to death. You
did? You really watched Martial Law? Do you remember my part?
I'd have to go back and watch it, unfortunately, because it's been a long time. Those are hard to find. Those episodes are hard to find. But
I played a corrupt food inspector, and I go into restaurants and I let loose cockroaches, and then I basically say, "Oh, I'm going to have to fine you for the cockroaches unless you pay me." So they caught up to me, and I'm sitting in my car eating a sandwich, and they come up, and the lead guy dumps a giant thing of cockroaches on my head. So they actually filmed that. It's like, I get the job. It's like, oh, okay. Dreading that day. So indeed, they dump a giant thing of cockroaches on my head. And, everybody, every insect, every bug, every living creature has its own wrangler. So the cockroach wrangler is like, all right, don't move. Got to get all the cockroaches. And they come and they like, pick this one out, pick that one out. I'm just sitting there going, Jesus fucking Christ. They get like 11 cockroaches, 12 cockroaches. Oh, we're missing the 13th cockroach. Where's that 13th cockroach? Can I get out of the car? They let me out of the car. And, guess where that 13th cockroach has gotten? It's like, I'll wrangle this one myself. No one ever asked about martial law. But
I got to follow up now because I got to hear about working with Sammo. Did you actually get a chance to? I know he didn't speak any English, but I mean, did you get a chance to at least say hello in any way or interact with him in any way whatsoever?
I probably did. My only memory of that, you'll be surprised too, is of the cockroach.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there are any number of shows where it's like you had 1 or 2 days, and your memory is very limited to that one particular some particular incident or moment or interaction that and the rest of it is a blur. I did some show. Jesus, what was it? I don't even remember. Jack and Jill. Also short-lived, and I was a doctor. I had a scene in a hospital room with, I think, is it Priscilla Presley? Jamie Presley. Yeah, I've gone on to have a great, wonderful career. She was not having a good day. And she was like, not directed at me. But the director came in and said, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, you second-rate hack. You're going to direct your way out of a paper bag. It's like, if you're the guest star, it's like, I'm going to just, look at this set. It's very... You're witness to a lot of I lost my cat. You're witness to a lot of interesting behavior when you're a guest star, a co-star on somebody else's show. Very, very hard sometimes. It's like going to a party, and it's a little bit like going like in that Albee play, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Sometimes it's like Oh, I'm at Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf's party. Geek. Sometimes not. Mark Harmon. I always say this about Mark because he and Scott Bakula, two people who, in my career, I think exemplify what it means to be number one on the call show.
Yeah.
Classy, professional, always kind, knew everybody's name, went out of his way to introduce himself to the extras, to the stand-ins, yada, yada, yada. Just, going to craft anybody want anything. Quarterbacks. Wonderful when you're on a show with a great quarterback. Can be tricky when you're on a show with somebody who hasn't quite taken on that, that kind of responsibility in a weird way.
Well, I think your cat Boo went to protect your home from any cockroaches. So thank you for that, Boo.
He hopped into he's got a secondary chair. Actually, there he is.
That's the captain's chair.
That's the captain's chair, exactly.
Well, since we're talking about pets, I feel like this is a good segue for me to ask, because you did get to work with the true star of Enterprise a few times. You got to have a few scenes with Porthos. What's Porthos really like? Is he a good boy?
2 girls.
Secret's out.
Long dead. Twins. I could never tell them apart, so I never knew which one I was working with. W.C. Fields' famous adage is, dogs and children. We didn't have any kids on the show, I'll say that. Although I did film a wonderful spot recently, which, if you're going to watch Trek Talks 2, Will Wheaton's a guest. And we had a lovely conversation about, in part, him being the kid on that show. He was a cheese eater. She was a cheese eater. So, you kind of had to. So there was some gassiness. Also true of Jolene, though. So, it's all right. Something I wasn't used to. Dogs are not great at hitting the marks. And, the other thing, unfortunately, is when you're doing any kind of a shot with a dog, it's really hard to keep the trainer either out of the shot or to keep the trainer's voice out of soundtrack. So, you're whatever the scene might be, if there's a dog in it, you inevitably in the background, it's like, okay, sit, okay, no, sit. It's like, could you shut up? Because I'm kind of trying to play the scene. I can't get the dog to sit if I don't say sit. It's like, that seems like something that the dog training union should have figured out. And those of you out there who are in the dog training union, I love you all. For anybody I've offended in my conversation today, Jamie Presley, I'm so sorry. I know you're wonderful. You just had a bad day. Denzel, thank you for the job. I really appreciate it. Prince among princes. Anybody else? My wife, I was only teasing. Solomon. Oh, Boo. Our old cat used to be Solomon. Boo, you're a wonderful cat. And that covers everybody.
Well, I got another obscure one here for you. Since we're going from martial law, let's keep going down this obscure path here. I have someone on Facebook named Ken Masterson. He believes he saw you in a series of anti-smoking PSAs as Chuck the Chain Smoker. That is true. He couldn't find any evidence that. That's a true thing that you did?
True thing. Chuck the Chain Smoker. Yep. Made Arizona, state of Arizona, and their anti-smoking commercials. I did a number of them. Kind of a doofus who's like, I want to quit, but I don't know if I can.
Turns into Don Knotts.
And then, this is very fortuitous for me, shortly after I'd done my run of those, I think 7 or 8 of them, there was a settlement with the tobacco industry and the federal government, and a great pool of money was made available as part of the settlement to various states, and a portion of each of the states' pool was supposed to be used for educational announcements. So they took all the anti-smoking spots that had been made in all the states and basically put them in a bank of available spots. And so every now and again it'd be like, Georgia has picked up Chuck the Chain Smoker and Florida is running Chuck the Chain Smoker. So I that was like a little cash infusion for years. Chuck the Chain Smoker ads.
Wow.
I almost didn't get that job because I did get it. And I haven't done commercials in years. But I got back from that commercial audition and I'd gone in early, as was my habit, to try and get the copy early, walk around, learn it, come back in. I didn't like reading off cue cards. So I did a good job, and I got the job, and I went for my first fitting, and I met the producer, and the producer said, yeah, we almost didn't cast you because we want a blue collar guy and you got girly arms. And it's like, now I do have girly arms. It's true. But it's like, girly arms? Really? I told my wife this, and she consequently changed my my nickname to Trucker Arms. So I, for many years, for my wife, I was called Trucker Arms after those commercials, and I called her Civ Head. So
I feel like that's a whole other podcast right there. I'm not going to touch that one.
Whole other podcast, or Queen of the Segways, because my wife in conversation can change the subject so quickly that you're left like, what?
Well, since we're talking about these bands too, I got to ask about Nintendo. I heard you did Nintendo also, and this must have been like sometime early on, I guess, right, for Nintendo's existence.
This was years ago. This was 35 years ago, maybe. I started out in Seattle, intending to be a stage actor, and if you make a little buck in Seattle, you're back then they had occasional films. I think I was in I Love You to Death. I was in a few other things, but you also do a lot of industrials. Short films for, so yes, I did one for Nintendo that I think was pleasing the difficult customer. And I marched up with my little Nintendo device. I was very Poindextery. This does not work. I'm going to need to return it. And they basically, of course, found out that I had the contrast down, so I couldn't see the screen. It was like, oh, well, yes, well, all right, very well. And that was dug up and shared. I delight in actually challenging people to find the most meretricious work I've done and bring it up for public consumption. Shredder Orpheus. That's the real challenge, is the single worst thing I've ever done. And although I think some people have found it, it has yet to kind of make itself onto my Twitter feed. A skateboard, a goth skateboard version of the Orpheus and Eurydice story, in which he is a punk rock skateboard artiste, and I am his manager. And it was not a nuanced performance, let's just say, in a non-nuanced film.
I mean, that sounds like a challenge. Now I have to find that so I can have an excuse to talk to you again and be like, "Hey, John, look what I found."
And a whole run of industrials that I did with Harry Anderson from Night Court fame. That was about navigating a dysfunctional workplace, basically. And I did 3 or 4 of those back in the I guess that would have been the late 80s, I think. Late 80s, early 90s. I don't remember what those were called, even. But he was friends with one of the producers and was doing the guy, basically a favor. I mean, Harry Anderson didn't need to do industrials after Night Court. So he showed up and, he was just having a high old time. He could not get his lines out. He was laughing through every take. It was taking forever. And he was one of those cats who just had sort of an infectious laugh. So I don't know that this has ever happened to me before, but just doing a scene with him, the whole time I was just in hysterics because he was in hysterics. And I felt very badly for the producers. They were like, could Harry? Anna Faris. I was in one with Anna Faris.
Wow.
Anna Faris. I'll tell you my Anna Faris story. I've told this story now several times in the hopes that this is going to make her way back to Anna Faris. Anna Faris got into town. I'd done this industrial with her in Seattle. And I'd actually gone back to Seattle. I was visiting. They asked me to do one more. This is after I'd moved down here. I was sure, fine. Okay. And I did one with young Anna Faris before she moved down here. And a couple of years go by. Maybe Anna was 19, 20. I don't remember. A couple of years go by. And I get this phone call. It's Anna Faris. Hi, John. You remember me? I'm in Los Angeles. I'm really excited to be here. I just need some tips, some hints to navigate the city. What do I do? How do I proceed? And I was like, well, sure, Anna. I'll meet with you. I'll have some coffee. I'll give you the ropes. I'll tell you what to. No. A day goes by, like one day. The next day, it's like, oh, hi, John. Anna Faris. I just got cast in Scary Movie. Anyway, never mind. See ya. Yeah. So now it's like, hello, Anna. Hello, Anna Faris. Is it disconnected? Oh, okay. So I almost bumped into Anna Faris at an event, and by now Anna Faris is a mom, she's a big star. I almost went up to her and said, Anna, you ghosted me. You wanted me when you wanted me, but as soon as you became a big star, did John Billingsley enter your consciousness again? He did not. My wife said, don't do that.
Well, it just so happens I have Anna Faris' number on my phone right now. I'm going to call her, and we're going to...
Let's call her up.
Bring it on.
Call her up.
Right, so, John, we're coming to a close here, but I feel like I'd be remiss to not give one more question that I need an answer to, because I'm a giant Star Trek nerd, FYI, in case you didn't know. Right? Can you believe it? Right? Like, what?
Never guessed.
I'm also an enormous collector of Star Trek toys, and Dr. Phlox has an action figure. It's him in an EV suit. I'd love to hear your thoughts on having an action figure, and what do you actually think about it? Does it look like you?
I like the fact that he has a detachable head, because my cats used to chase the head around the room, and that was fun for them until it got lost. Fortunately, he had a spare head, so I'm down to only one of the two available heads. The limbs were malleable, so I could pose him in salacious ways. I think for a period of time he was kept in our house with his head plunged into a cocktail beaker. Famously, actually, Scott Bakula's action figure was photographed in various states of dishabille on our set until Scott, I think, took exception to one particularly prurient photograph and put the kibosh on that. Susie Westmore, I believe, Suzanne Diaz Westmore, now Suzanne Diaz, who was one of the makeup artists, I believe, was responsible for these photographs, and she had to stop.
Well, there's probably a chance for Phlox to get a second figure soon. I don't know if you're aware of the company Exo-6, but they're doing some big Star Trek toys. I don't know if you know something or don't know something. We probably shouldn't say, but I'm fingers crossed that we get another Dr. Phlox figure, and this time in an actual Phlox outfit, not just one of those crazy EV suits.
In my pajamas, I know. I think the nice thing about putting me in the EV suit was it sort of like eliminated the need for them to actually kind of like, capture my paunch.
Yeah.
So if they actually do a action figure, really is not what mine should be more like a sedentary figure. Be like, sitting on a chair, which reminds me, I should plug my show, which is the show that I want them to produce, which I always plug in hopes that eventually somebody who's on high is going to hear the idea and go, oh, Old Fat Phlox. Old Fat Phlox. Every episode begins with Old Fat Phlox sitting in a rocking chair, and he's old. And he's just sitting there going, back in the day when I was a space doctor, I had all sorts of adventures. There was that time on Riga 4. And then you go into flashback music, and a lot of young people run around and act out the episode, including some young, hot version of Dr. Phlox. And then at the end, it goes, and it's back to me again. Well, stay tuned next week for another exciting episode of Old Fat Phlox. I'm number one in the call sheet. I only have to work about 20 minutes a day, and I get a big fact check. That's my show. Old Fat Phlox.
I can see the casting notice right now. I can see Chris Hemsworth totally being young Phlox. That'd be
absolutely perfect. Absolutely. Some handsome young buck is young Dr. Phlox.
Anna Faris as a young Weasel.
Yes, Anna Faris could play one of the lesser aliens. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Bottom of the call sheet.
Jamie Presley, she could be in it too. Denzel, if you want a part, come on down. Open casting call. I don't know if I want to be Denzel. I'm not sure I'll have him in the show.
Well, I'd love to hear, as we're coming to a close here, I'm going to phrase this, I guess, in the Deep Space Nine way, because it just works out this way. But, we know what you left behind on Enterprise. What did you take with you on that final day on the set? Did you take any Phlox makeup home? Did you take a chunk of the chair? Is there anything you brought home with you?
Scott Bakula's chained in the bathroom right now.
That's where he's been.
Yep.
That's why he's not in Quantum Leap. That explains it.
I let him out for work days because he makes a nice living, and I, certainly not want to turn down a buck. And then he comes back home. I took my clothes. I took my eyeballs. Everything I took, I basically auctioned off for charity. I didn't keep anything for myself. Much as my much as my cluttered room might belie, I actually I'm not much of a memorabilia person. I love books, but beyond that, and people do give you stuff, so I end up with oddments and endments here and there. But I had no particular desire to grab anything. They also put cameras in the ceiling, seriously, to keep people from taking shit. So it's like nobody was going to unbolt the captain's chair or anything like that. I'm sure people got to kind of stick a phaser here and there in their pocket, but beyond that. I think somebody actually bought all of my little PJs. That's one thing I like. Even though I had to wear a rubber head, I got to wear pajamas to work. That I like.
Easy wardrobe day, at least.
Easy wardrobe, yeah. So they pajamas and slippers. That's what it's like. Denobulan is a planet of Hugh Hefners, as far as I can tell. It's like they're all just slopping around in their undie pants and they're in the pajamas. Somebody bought all of that shit
Wow.
and from Texas. And I met them at a convention, and they said, I'm going to send you something. I said, well, you don't have, but okay. And I get this like gargantuan box in the mail, and it's all my clothing. It's just like, why? You should have, what, you bought it to return to me? So I did eventually auction it all off to charity, I think. I should have kept a couple of pairs of those pants because they were pretty comfortable. But
I mean, they looked pretty nice. As far as Star Trek outfits go, you definitely got the good side there.
I know, and I wasn't even thinking, because of course I could have worn them to conventions. It could be like, well, I'm not like John Hurt, so I'm not going to dress up like a Klingon, but, hey, I'm wearing the doctor pajamas. Authentic doctor pajamas.
Just don't cut your toenails for a few months, and you can just do like the Phlox bare feet thing too.
Well, I do when I go to conventions. I actually cut my toenails, put them in a little bag, and say whoever asks the most embarrassing question is going to win my toenails. Along with a poem I've written. I usually write a little poem, a little bit of doggerel that I, sort of along with an autographed picture, just to kind of deflect the questions away from excessively Star Trek-centric questions into the kind of interestingly provocative and embarrassing questions I prefer.
I feel like I need to aspire now to getting those toenails one day.
I know. You got to work on your embarrassing questions. I'm not sure.
I mean, we did touch on martial law. We got close, I feel like.
Well, no, I brought that up myself.
I
know.
It was on my list. It's true. All right, it's fair. I'll get you next time.
That's also, that wouldn't have embarrassed me. Not that anybody ever has embarrassed me. I'm afraid I'm fairly unembarrassable. I'm usually the first one to make fun of myself, so I've usually taken the field away from everybody else. But it's always fun to see people try.
Well, I have a quest now, so I've got to work on that for next time around.
This is my quest.
This is my interview that I lost control
Dr.
of.
Phlox.
So we are the man of LaFloxa. So, apologies for anybody out there listening whose questions we didn't get to today. While Denobulans might be very patient and have all the time in the world, I know John has a lot of other things to do, including, once again, a charity event that we do have to touch on one more time. So, John, Hollywood Food Coalition, Trek Talks 2, one last plug.
Hollywood Food Coalition, wonderful organization. You can check us out at hofoco.org, or you can go to trektalks.net, which will also link to our site and will contain more information about the show January 14, 10 in the morning Pacific to 6 o'clock in the evening. Panels, musical interludes, fabulous guests, Brent Spiner, John Delancey, Nana Visitor, Terry Farrell, Armin Shimmerman, Jonathan Frakes, some amazing special guests that we're not going to announce until January 1 that'll blow your mind that we got them. Please tune in and make a donation by way of saying thank you for throwing this digital convention, John Billingsley and pals, to the Hollywood Food Coalition.
So visit again, trektalks.net for more details. We're going to have all those links in the description and the show notes for this episode. So again, do not miss out. January 14th, be there. It's going to be awesome. Shout out again to the Trek Geeks podcast for helping me connect today with Mr. Billingsley here. And John, if I was going to have a starship of my own, I would definitely have Phlox on board as my doctor, without a doubt. But more so, I'd want to have John Billingsley himself on the ship there to help keep me sane. So
fabulous. I'd happily, except John Billingsley would be far too frightened to go off on a starship. He's not like William Shatner. I don't want to go into space. That's like, even just what I saw in the paper yesterday about those poor people flying to Hawaii that hit their heads on the ceiling. I don't even want to do that anymore.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Dr. Phlox braver than John Billingsley.
Either way, though, it's been great chatting today with you about Star Trek, but more so the other things outside of Star Trek, because it was really wonderful being able to explore some of those things, talking about cold space and martial law.
Air this interview backwards, because it starts with great seriousness and it ends in lightness and good humoredness. You may just have to air it backwards.
That's true. Or maybe that's going to be, if we play it backwards, it'll be a completely different message, perhaps.
Play it backwards, like that Beatles album. That's right.
Exactly. Yeah, for real, John. It's wonderful here. You are an actor's actor, and you are a true mensch for all the good work that you're doing out there in the world. So thank you for all the wonderful work you do with your charity organizations. Just wonderful, wonderful things. And it's been honestly a real honor to be able to talk with you today and spend this time with you. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Appreciate all the time, all the energy. I'm going to stop rambling, but big thing, thank you. And one more time, trektalks.net. See you guys on the 14th. That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold. Until next time, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Trek Untold, all one word. If you'd like to directly support this podcast, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter over on patreon.com/TrekUntold, which gives you access to some great perks that can't be beat. Or pick up some merchandise from our store, or use my Amazon shop link to check out all kinds of different Star Trek merchandise. Links for all these things are in the show notes. Shout out to Triple Fiction Productions for being a key sponsor of Trek Untold. Don't forget to check them out and all of the fine folks whose ads you've seen or heard on this podcast too. If you have any questions, feedback, or comments for the show, or would like to suggest a guest or discuss sponsorship options for any of these episodes in the future, send me a message at trekuntold@gmail.com. I hope to see you here again as we uncover more untold stories from Star Trek and beyond, and get to know even more amazing people who have contributed to this ever-expanding universe. Until next time, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz, and remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the RageWorks podcasting network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.